All right. Good to welcome everybody. I want to dedicate tonight's story to my dear friend, Rabbi Avram Plotkin, Avram Aaron Ben Yitzchak Al Shalom. Today is the 7th day since he passed away, since his funeral. And it's customary at the end of Shiva to say a story about the person who passed away. Rabbi Avram Plotkin was a person who, although was a businessman and a very down-to-earth person, but he exemplified what the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that the air of Gan Eden extends around each person. Around each person, you have something of the atmosphere of Gan Eden. Your thoughts, your words, your good thoughts, your good words are all embedded in the air of Gan Eden around you. Avram Plotkin was a Yid who, just being in his presence, you felt that you were in some special place. So his arrival to Gan Eden, I'm sure, is a very seamless move, because he's a Yid who was always very heavenly, very kind, wise person. And tonight's story is actually about a man named Reb Sender. The story is from this book called Tolos Admar Marash. It's an incredible sefer. This sefer actually was written by the Rebbe, the Hebrew version of it. The English version has an addendum, which is not, as far as I know, isn't published anywhere else. They found the previous Rebbe's writings about his grandmother, the wife of the Rebbe Marash, Rebbetzin Rivkah, and the previous Rebbe describes the ancestry of his grandmother, and it's unbelievable. I don't think it's printed anywhere in Hebrew. Anyone can tell me where it's found in Hebrew anywhere? If it's printed, I don't think it's printed anywhere in Hebrew, as far as I know. But it's printed in English in this book, and it's mamish unbelievable. Mabel Sarayin, it's unbelievable. So the story is that just to give a little bit of background of Rebbetzin Rivkah, the wife of Marash. Rebbetzin Rivkah was the daughter of Rebbetzin Chayesara, who was a daughter of the Mittel Rebbe, and she was married to a man named Reb Aaron. And so the Friedrich Rebbe talks about this Reb Aaron. Reb Aaron, he describes his lineage. Chani, I don't know if you want, Chani, you're on the, people can hear you, so I'm going to let you know.
Should I take the video out?
Yeah. So,
press that's you're right.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So the Friedrich Rebbe talks about this Reb Aaron. Reb Aaron was an incredible Talmud Chacham, and came from a long line of Chachamim and Tzadikim and Chassidim. His great-grandfather, Reb Hirsch, first embraced the Alter Rebbe when the Alter Rebbe first visited Shklov, and he was very impressed with him. He was an older man already when the Alter Rebbe first visited Shklov, and he was unable to travel to Rebbe. He said, if I would have the strength, I would immediately go to visit the Alter Rebbe, but I'm an old man, I can't go. And he put his whole entire estate to the Alter Rebbe to use, for whatever the Alter Rebbe wanted to use anything. He put his all of his resources at the Alter Rebbe's disposal. His son, Rabbi Moshe, was an incredible genius. Just to give an example of his genius, Tzemach Tzedek would love to talk to him. Rabbi Moshe was someone who memorized the entire Seder Mishnayos. He memorized all the Mishnayos, because he wanted to be able to think Torah in his old age when he was afraid he might lose his eyesight. So he memorized all the Mishnayos in order that he would have something in his mind after he said, maybe people could study Torah with me, but ultimately I'm going to maybe alone sometimes, I won't be able to study Torah, so therefore he memorized all the Mishnayos. In addition to that, the Tzemach Tzedek would love to talk to him. And Tzemach Tzedek would say that this Rabbi Moshe was such a genius that when he would have a muskal rishon, he would have an immediate conclusion on any particular subject they would learn. And his first conclusion, before he could digest what he had himself had, why he had this conclusion, was so brilliant that Tzemach Tzedek and Rabbi Moshe would try to figure out why he had that conclusion. In other words, his first insight in any Talmudic subject was so brilliant they had to work on trying to figure out how he arrived at that conclusion. But he was so amazing that the Tzemach Tzedek, who of course you know the Tzemach Tzedek is, he would trust him and listen to him and study. They would study his own words, the words of Rabbi Moshe, to figure out how he got to that conclusion. But his first initial understanding of any subject in Talmud was so razor sharp that it was something worth studying. Anyway, so this Rabbi Moshe was Rebbetzin Rivkah's grandfather. And the story I'm going to share with you was about the chassid Reb Sender, Rabbi Moshe's son. The father, the father of Rabbi Moshe, his name was Reb Sender, and the story is about this Reb Sender. When Reb Sender passed away, the Alter Rebbe visited the city of Shklov, and the Alter Rebbe told Reb Sender's father, Reb Hirsch, he said to him, I want you to know that you're mourning your son because you love your son. But I want you to know that the truth is there's no reason to mourn for your son. Imagine, the Alter Rebbe said, if your son went to a far-off place and you knew your son was okay, even though you couldn't see him, but if you knew your son was doing really well in the far-off place, you would be happy for your son. You wouldn't be upset your son's in this far-off place because you love your son, and even though you can't see him, you still feel good your son's doing so well. The Alter Rebbe said that he indicated that he saw the soul of Reb Sender in Gan Eden, and the Alter Rebbe said, I didn't imagine that he would have such garments on his soul in Gan Eden. I couldn't imagine. And the Alter Rebbe then was told the following story, which I'm going to share with you. And because of this story, the Alter Rebbe then understood why the garments of his soul in Gan Eden were so beautiful, were so holy. Of course, again, we don't know what the definition of a soul in Gan Eden is, and what the garments of the soul are, but there's something about the story that we can all identify with, and it will give us a insight of how to have something of the air of Gan Eden around us. As I mentioned, Alter Rebbe says we have in this world something of the air of Gan Eden in our own atmosphere, the thoughts that we have and the words that we say, and that makes the world ready for Mashiach. So here's the story. Reb Sender was a very wealthy man. He was a great genius in his own right. Yes, Rose, do you have a question? Right, Rosie. Rosie, remember, is another story I told her, which is similar to this story about two chosim. That's for a different time. We'll tell that story, Rosie. Thank you. Reb Sender would love to argue, not for the sake of argument. He would love to argue with various chassidically challenged people who did not understand the greatness of the Alter Rebbe, and would challenge the Alter Rebbe, especially because historically there was a lot of poison put out about the Alter Rebbe and about Chassidim, and Reb Sender would love to defend the Alter Rebbe. He was gifted with incredible intellectual talent, not just intellectual talent. His heart, the Friedrich Rebbe writes, was open like a pischa shel ulam. His heart was open like the wide entrance of the antechamber in the temple. He had a huge heart, and he spoke with great wisdom. And when he spoke, it caused such an enchantment to his listeners that people gravitated to his way of life. Whenever he would argue with someone about the authenticity of the Alter Rebbe's, hey, don't go away, Rosie, give me 5 more minutes. Whenever he would argue with someone about the Alter Rebbe's way of teaching chassidus, the Alter Rebbe people would gravitate. They would become chassidim. Rabbi Sender would say about people that he won over with his arguments, he would never speak derogatorily about anybody. He spoke with refinement and dignity, and people who he would argue with would resort, unfortunately, to a lot of negative energy. But he always spoke with such refinement, and it was felt by those listening the truth of his words, and he convinced a lot of people to join the ranks of the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe. So this Reb Sender used to say about the Chassidim that he brought into the ranks of the Alter Rebbe, this quoted a verse which is said about Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu said about the souls that he made in Haran. When Avram Avinu was in Haran, through spreading the word of God in Haran, Avram Avinu caused a lot of people to join his family in their belief in Hashem. So Reb Sender used to say the word Haran could also be read as Goren. Haran could also be read as the word Goren, which means throat. And he was saying that I didn't really do anything special in these arguments. I didn't really explain Tanya or anything deep in these arguments. All I did was use my words. They were just the words themselves. It wasn't anything really fundamentally. He said that the people he was arguing with often weren't capable of understanding the depth of chassidus. Didn't really know what he couldn't really share with them. But just the words themselves that he used caused a lot of people to join the ranks of the chassidus. Anyways, this Reb Sender, he was a wealthy businessman, and he once traveled with his father, Reb Hirsch, to Leipzig. It was very common for people to travel to Leipzig in those days to do business. And in Leipzig, he purchased a consignment of tea. In Leipzig. And if you're not muted, try to mute yourself because you can hear the background, unless you want to say something. So the Reb Sender, he said that Reb Sender went with his father to buy consignment of tea. And the seller of the tea was located either in Minsk or in another city. And the seller accepted responsibility for the merchandise until it would safely arrive in Shklov, where Reb Sender and his father were located. The seller didn't pay taxes on the tea, although he was supposed to pay taxes. But Reb Sender wasn't responsible for although the seller, the way it worked was that until the tea arrived in Shklov, it was on consignment, so it was the responsibility of the seller. So the seller didn't pay the taxes on it, although he should have, and the merchandise arrives in Shklov. That's their agreement. Reb Sender was fantastically successful in this business. Hold on one second. Okay, sorry about that. So Reb Sender was fantastically successful in this business. And hey, Rose, give me 2 more minutes, please. And he was so successful that a lot of other people wanted to join this business as well. A lot of people wanted to do the same thing. And although it wasn't halachically so sound to encroach on his business, many people did. And especially people from the Misnagda camp, those who opposed the Alter Rebbe, they encroached in the business. A lot of the Hasidim wanted to make a public affair of their hasagas gvul, that they were encroaching on his business. But Reb Sender refused to hear of this. Reb Sender said that God gives enough livelihood for everybody. Don't make a big deal about this. This isn't a big deal. They could go into the same tea business as me. I don't care. It's all right. But there was one man who had a particular deep hatred for the Hasidim, coupled with an announcement from the Bezdin. The Jewish courts, unfortunately, made a lot of mistakes in those days about the Hasidim. They made an announcement that Hasidim are allowed to be killed. Hasidim, their money is mutter. You're allowed to steal their money. You're allowed to be moisture them. You're allowed to tell the government about anything that they're doing wrong, because they are such heretics. That's what the Jewish courts had announced, and many well-meaning misnagdim took it literally, and they thought it's a mitzvah to kill whatever. We shouldn't talk at length about negative things. Either way, so Rav Sender there's a particular guy who hated Chassidim, and he hated Rav Sender personally, and he thought of the following plan. He wanted Rav Sender to lose his business. So what he did was, he didn't denounce Rav Sender himself to the government, because after all, the tea was on consignment from the seller in Minsk. What he did was, as the merchandise arrived in Shklov, he announced that the seller had sold merchandise without the taxes. Rosie, one more minute. He had sold the merchandise without the taxes. And and he planned that this should cause great harm to Reb Sender. Reb Sender should have to pay, even though it was the responsibility of the seller, but because the merchandise had arrived in Shklov, he would have to pay all of the taxes and the fine for not being taxed. So the rumor was that this merchandise was reported to have been sold illegally without the taxes, and so therefore, when the merchandise arrived, Rav Sender and his father, Rav Hirsch, made sure to tell everybody, not to tell anybody that the merchandise arrived. They kept the merchandise a secret. But meanwhile, what had really happened was this informer had caused his own merchandise to have a rumor that his own merchandise was reported, that it wasn't sold. Yes, Rosie? You know the story? Okay. So the guy who had wanted to report to the government that Reb Sender's merchandise was being sold illegally. Yes, Rosie?
I feel like the story that they all have the same name.
That's right. It's Ayat story too. Very good, Rosie. So Reb Sender, so the guy who informed on Reb Sender actually ended up messing himself up, because the government had taken the guy's merchandise who had informed on him, and they had confiscated his merchandise, and he lost a lot of money. Reb Sender himself also lost, because Reb Sender had to keep all the merchandise a secret until, for many months after the season for the sale of tea had passed, and after that whole season, the tea was stale already, and then it was possible for him to take out the tea and to sell it at a far reduced price, not making any profit at all. But the guy who really suffered was the informer, and not just he suffered at the time, but I mean he did succeed in hurting Reb Sender. Reb Sender not only lost the profit on that particular deal, but more, Reb Sender no longer engaged in that business anymore. But the one who really lost bad was the informer himself. He lost everything, to the extent that all the more generous people in Shklov collected money for him and his family for their bare necessities. They lost everything. Reb Sender himself, although he had discovered he was such a, this was the kind of people they were, he knew who had informed the government about him. He knew this was the guy who did it. This guy externally always pretended he was his friend. He always was nice to him. But Reb Sender actually knew this guy was the one who informed the government about him. But still, Reb Sender himself helped the family often. And Reb Sender, his way was, in general, the Chassidim and the Misnagdim would try to reconciliate after the hard times in the initial beginnings of Chassidim, when there was a lot of real attacks against the Chassidim. So at that time, people were trying to reconciliate, especially the Chassidim, trying to reconciliate with the Misnagdim. So Reb Sender would make a point of trying to do things to bring people together. So he would visit the sick, and he, of course, visited this person. This person had tried so hard to harm him. Reb Sender went to visit him. And this person at the time was so heartbroken by the loss of his money, he became physically sick. And not only that, but this guy had more problems because he had a daughter of marriageable age. She needed to find a shidduch. But no one in those days would marry anybody without a dowry. And she didn't have a dowry. Couldn't even think about a dowry because they couldn't make ends meet. They had no money for bare necessities. But Reb Sender went to their house, and Reb Sender saw the guy's face his face start contorted. Seeing Reb Sender, seeing this guy who had tried to hurt, coming to be kind to him and visiting him, it made him crazy. But Reb Sender looked at him and he said, "Don't worry, the salvation of God comes in an instant. You will yet see nachas from your children." And he comforted him, and the guy did teshuvah. He repented, and he Reb Sender reconciliated and became friends. But Reb Sender wasn't satisfied with that. Shortly after Reb Sender's visit, they discovered under the pillow of the sick man 500 silver ruble, which was a considerable amount of money to be used as a dowry for this man's daughter. This was a story that was told to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe said, now I understand why he has such beautiful clothing, why his levushim, why his garments of the soul in Gan Eden are so beautiful. I never imagined that someone could have, that he could have such beautiful garments if his soul in Gan Eden. But now, hearing the story, hearing what he had done, how he had tried so hard to be kind to someone who had wronged him, now I understand the story. This is in sync with the Gemara says. The Gemara says that if someone embarrasses you, you don't embarrass them back, you are forgiven from all your averos. If someone shames you and don't shame them back, the Gemara says it cleans you up from all of the whatever is not good in your neshama. So, anyways, this is very in sync with this week's Torah. The Torah talks this week about changing the garment of the children of the Kohen Gadol. So the bottom line is, my friends, is that a new week is coming, a new week of mitzvahs and torah and davening and Avos Yisrael. And it's not just about getting a greater Gan Eden, bringing the air of Gan Eden around us to bring Mashiach. By embodying this same kind of character that Cassandra had, to be kind to those who you think may have wronged you, as we are told every night before going to sleep, before we're supposed to say the Nishma, to forgive anyone and ask Hashem to not hurt anybody who's wronged us. So that this causes great blessing to ourselves, and it causes great blessing to the person who has, God forbid, wronged you. And to really, the Zohar says about a person, Zohar says a story about a person who tremendous miracles happen to this person, and the Zohar, why did this person merit such great miracles? And the Zohar answers, this person merited such great miracles because every time before going to sleep, he would make sure to announce, I forgive anybody who has wronged me. So just ending the day that way, saying Hareinu Moichel, you bring the air of Gan Eden upon you, you bring blessing, miraculous blessing upon you. So it's a great way to start the week in a fresh way. And the Rebbe says that even someone you know who's out to get you, but by giving them the benefit of the doubt and approaching things in a positive way, you bring out the best in that person. So it's a living a Gan Eden kind of life here on earth that we were taught to live by Rabbi Plotkin. May Hashem have an aliyah. May he be good to better on behalf of all of his family and his wife and children, grandchildren, Klal Yisrael, and speedily be reunited with us, the coming Mashiach.